All right, today we're doing a deep dive into one of the world's most persistent economic crises. Think of it like this. We're treating the Iranian economy as a patient, and its currency, the rial, is showing some seriously alarming symptoms. Our job here is to diagnose the underlying disease.
So, you've got a currency in an absolute freefall and prices going through the roof. The government's big idea? A plan to just drop 4 zeros from all the banknotes. But here's the huge question we're tackling. Based on the source material, is this the right medicine, or is it just a painkiller that does nothing to cure the actual disease? To get to the bottom of this, we're going to follow a really clear 5-part structure. First, we'll look at the symptoms. Then we'll make our diagnosis. After that, we'll evaluate the cure they're proposing, explore a real treatment plan, and finally, pinpoint the single biggest things standing in the way of a recovery. Okay, let's jump right into part 1 and really get a feel for the symptoms. What does this economic illness actually look like for the people living through it every single day? This number? Wow, it really says it all. The real's value has just been hammered, hitting a shocking all-time low of 700,000 to a single US dollar. And this isn't just a number on a screen. It's a sign of a complete and total collapse in confidence, often sparked by things like geopolitical news that just lay bare how fragile the currency really is. And this right here is the human cost. It's devastating. When a currency falls apart this badly, it's a direct assault on your ability to buy things. I mean, just imagine, your salary is the same, but every single week it buys you less and less. Less food, less medicine. That's the brutal reality of what they call the shrinking family basket. Okay, so we've seen the symptoms. Now let's move on and figure out the cause. What is the diagnosis? The source material points to something it calls a triad of instability. 3 core problems that are all tangled up together. So, the first and honestly the most critical part of this diagnosis is something called debt monetization. It sounds kind of technical, but it's not. It's simple. When the government can't pay its bills with taxes or normal borrowing, it just turns to the central bank and says, print more money. That's it. It's basically using the money printer to cover expenses, and this is the main engine driving the entire crisis. And here is the direct, unavoidable consequence. The government hits print, and that leads to this massive flood of cash into the economy. That's the liquidity growth you see. So you've got way more reals chasing the exact same amount of stuff. And what happens next? Well, you get runaway inflation, which, as you can see, has just exploded to crisis levels. So you have to ask, why? Why does the government need to print so much money in the first place? And this slide, this is where you find the answer. It all comes down to political priorities. The budget breakdown shows huge chunks of money going to security and ideological institutions. Then there's this big slice for non-transparent, off-budget spending. And that just doesn't leave much for things like public services. This choice, this structure, basically forces them to lean on the central bank's money printer to fill the gaps. And the last piece of our diagnosis is the outside pressure. The best way to think about this is like a comorbidity, a totally separate illness that makes the main one way, way worse. International sanctions choke off the flow of foreign money from oil sales. They cripple the banking system. And on top of all that, any little hint of geopolitical drama sends the already fragile rial into another nosedive. So keeping that diagnosis in mind, the money printing, the budget priorities, the sanctions, let's go back and look at the government's big prescription again. Chopping 4 zeros off the currency. Is this really the right medicine for the disease we've just laid out? The plan itself is pretty straightforward. The government wants the central bank to spend the next 5 years getting ready to just lop 4 zeros off the rial. So what used to be a 10,000 rial note would become a new 1 rial note. The stated goal is to make everyday shopping and accounting simpler. But, and this is a big but, economists cited in our source material are not buying it. As this quote spells out pretty clearly, unless you fix the root causes, that debt monetization we talked about, simply removing zeros is like giving a critically ill patient a haircut. Sure, they might look a little different, but it does absolutely nothing to improve their actual health. And this table just illustrates the problem perfectly. Let's look at Turkey, which did this successfully back in 2005. Before they even thought about dropping zeros, they did all the hard work first. They got their spending under control, they made their central bank independent, and they got rid of their confusing multiple exchange rates. Now look at Iran in 2025. They meet 0 of these essential preconditions. It's a recipe for failure. Okay, so if dropping zeros isn't the real answer, then what is? Well, the good news is the source material actually lays out a very clear
very comprehensive roadmap to a real recovery. Now, it's not easy, but it is clear.
The whole plan is broken down into 3 really logical phases. First, you have an immediate stabilization phase. You have to stop the bleeding. Second, you have a medium-term phase to build a strong foundation for the economy. And third, you have a long-term phase that's all about creating sustainable growth that can actually withstand sanctions.
So, phase 1 is basically the emergency room. It's triage. It's about directly treating that triad of instability we diagnosed earlier. You make the central bank independent. That's the direct cure for debt monetization. You turn off the money printer. You put a stop to all that off-budget spending, which tackles the deficits. And you unify the exchange rates. Get rid of that corrupt, multi-tiered system, which is absolutely crucial. And for long-term health, the focus has to shift away from oil. I mean, just look at the incredible potential on this chart. The goal here is to build a modern, diverse economy, developing sectors like tourism, which could rake in nearly $30 billion a year, and growing the digital economy to 10% of GDP. That's how you build a resilient system that isn't so dangerously dependent on oil prices and sanctions. So a clear treatment plan exists. We know what to do. But the prognosis, the chance of success, it all hangs on one final critical factor. And it has nothing to do with economics or financial theory. It's about whether the patient is actually willing to take the medicine. This quote, wow. This one comes from an Iranian lawmaker, someone on the inside, and it just cuts right to the bone. He's admitting that they know what they need to do, fix the exchange rate, cut the subsidies, but in his own words, no one has the courage to decide. So the barrier isn't a lack of knowledge, it's a lack of political will. And that right there is our final diagnosis. The whole economic crisis, the collapsing rial, the shrinking family basket, all of it is just a symptom. The real disease is a political structure, where those tough, painful, but absolutely necessary economic reforms are constantly pushed aside for other priorities. Which leaves us right here, with this one big question. The roadmap to economic health? It's on the table. It's clear. It's understood. But is the political courage to actually walk down that road the one final ingredient that's still missing?